So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the 2021 National Annual Training for the National Small Business and Environmental Assistance Programs and the Small Business Ombudsman folks out there. And we are so grateful that you could join us this week for this event. And we have put together lots of variety of topics to gain more knowledge about the small business programs that are across the nation. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. I am Jennifer Collins, and I am from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. I serve as the National Steering Committee Chair, and this year I was also the chair of the Annual Training Planning Committee. I also want to thank the Planning Committee who has met with me over the last 3 to 4 months to prepare this event. And kudos to those folks out there who have endured and come up with this wonderful agenda for all of us to experience. So it is our hope that you have a great time learning and discovering something new for you to take back to your own program. And so we just hope that you can learn from each other and from the presenters. I also wanted to let you know that today we will be in webinar format. As you entered, you noticed that there are just 2 of us on the screen, and it is we are the only ones allowed to speak today. However, for tomorrow and on Thursday, we will be in a meeting format where you will be able to converse amongst yourselves through the chat if necessary. So today we have the chat function that goes to the panelists, and the question and answers that if you have something that comes up during a presentation that you'd like to ask the presenter, go ahead and put that in the question and answer button, and that is down at the bottom of your screen. You should see the question and answer bubbles. We also wanted to make the suggestion today that you take some time to adjust your screen so that you can see the presentations better. We suggest to move that little slide function in the middle of your screen. Maybe make the speaker a little smaller and the presentation a little larger when we have presentations on the screen, so you'll be able to see those more clearly. And I will be giving the speakers their timing cues today, so if you hear me interrupt them, just let them know that we're going to wrap things up. Also, anyone who is also presenting later on in the schedule, you will be promoted to a panelist by Allison at the time that you need to be speaking. So she'll promote you to a panelist so you can join us here. And all of the days are on the same link, so you will not need to worry about a different Zoom link for tomorrow or Thursday. Come back to the same one and it will be ready for you to log in. So I think that's all of the announcements I have. If there's, let's see, if there's any questions anyone has, please do feel free to ask those questions of us. And if you're having any technical issues, we'll just recommend that you kind of log off and log back on, see if you can adjust things for yourself. We'll be busy, so if you have anything that you need to email someone, at Jennifer Wittenberg from Iowa has agreed to serve as our technical resource during this event. So if you have anything like that, go ahead and reach out to her directly and she can help you. And now I would like to turn it over to Peter Tsirigotis from our office, US EPA, Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And I was hoping that Rhonda was on here to introduce you, but I think,
Actually, give me just a second.
is
She is
she
on now and I can
okay?
go ahead and promote her.
Great.
Sorry, folks, give me just a second.
Okay, Rhonda, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Peter.
Thank you. I was
Thank you.
composing an email. I'm like, I can't get on. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Rhonda Wright, and I am in the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And I am happy to introduce the Director of OAQPS, who is Peter Tsirigotis. He's the Director of OAQPS. He's been managing our office for quite some time now. Prior to being the Director of OAQPS, he was the Division Director of the Sector Policies Division, Sector Policy Programming Division. And he has been managing many of the air regulatory rules that is coming out of OAQPS for a while. And so without cutting into his time, I want to turn it over now to Peter so that he can welcome and introduce everyone. Well, not introduce, but welcome everyone.
Thank you, Rhonda. And thank you, Jennifer, for making it pretty seamless for me to join today. I'm quite remedial in my Zoom and Microsoft Teams techniques, so yeah, this worked quite seamlessly. I want to echo Rhonda by saying good morning and good afternoon to everybody, and I'd like to thank you all for inviting me. I'd like to take a few minutes just to just summarize what we do as an office and our commitment to working with small businesses and their representatives and the small business community at large, and to fill you in on some notable things that we're involved in these days that are probably going to be of interest to you as a community. I'll start by saying that I've been the director now of OAQPS for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. And one of the things that we wanted to really focus on as an office, because we're largely a regulatory office, is not just working on regulations that are national, not only working with the states and our regional offices as we try to develop these regulations and ultimately implement them, but also work with key stakeholder groups as early on in the process as possible to get their input, to work with them on how best to engage us on the federal level, and then ultimately to work with them if the rule affects them, how best they can be affected by the rule, or if they're impacted in other ways by our regulations, to work with them on them understanding how these impacts work. So in the case of small businesses, Rhonda, who you just met, is our small business program lead for our office. And we have been going through for the last couple of years, really trying to emphasize this program, trying to emphasize it not only externally, but also internally, and making sure that our various divisions within our office that work on regulations are willing and able to engage with small businesses as early on as possible. And just to give you a flavor of what in general we do a number of national regulations in both the toxics arena as well as the new source performance arena. If you're hearing some slight barking in the background. I apologize. I've got two dogs that tend to get pretty excited when a delivery person comes anywhere in the vicinity. But we do national regulations on toxics as well as new source performance standards. We also work with the states and our regional offices in setting national ambient air quality standards and working with the states as they try to come into compliance with those standards. And we collect a number of inventories, and we do a number of analyses to support our regulations, but also to inform the states and the public about the quality of their air and how exactly our regulations impact them. As part of that, focusing specifically on small businesses, we've over the last year, we've been working quite closely with our 10 regional offices, and in the air world, we now have reps from every one of our regional offices participating with us as we move our program forward and as we try to focus on what our products are and how best to inform small businesses about these products and get your input sooner rather than later. We're also in the process of putting a strategic plan together, which essentially is going to be the basis of how we will be interacting internally within the agency, but also with U.S. stakeholders. The whole point of the strategic plan is to, when we put it together, to share it with you, get your input, and make sure that our efforts are actually meaningful to the customers that we're trying to serve. Moving quickly to some of the actions that we expect you'll be quite interested in. There's in our realm, there's a number of executive orders that the president issued back in January that affect us, notably in the regulatory area. One of those is looking at the oil and natural gas production sectors and their emissions, and working to address emissions from new sources as well as existing sources. The way our regulations are structured for all these existing sources that we're going to be affecting, we will be working quite closely with the states and with and as a result with your small business representatives, I'm sure, in those states. But now that we're starting the regulatory process, which will take, obviously these processes take about at least a couple of years just to get the regulations up and running. We wanted to make sure to get your input sooner rather than later. So in the context of oil and gas, we've already assembled what we call a non-regulatory docket, where folks that are interested in giving us information can give us information even before the regulatory process starts, even before we put a proposal out. We're also planning a number of listening sessions starting in mid-June. And for those of you that are interested in that, feel free to reach out to Rhonda, and I'm sure she can get you connected to the extent that you're not already aware of them. As part of these regulations, for oil and gas specifically, the president's executive order instructed us to have a proposal by September of this year. So we're working under quite a tight timeline, which is why we want to get everybody's input sooner rather than later. A number of other regulations that we work on are under our toxics program. Under our toxics program, we have what is probably about 100 different regulations, 150 different regulations affecting various sectors of the economy, everything from very small sources to very large sources like power plants. Those are in large part source categories that were dictated by Congress back in the 1990 amendments. But our obligation is to not only develop these rules, but then on some periodic basis to keep updating them. We're in the process of updating a number of them as we speak. We have a number of rules that are, some of which definitely will affect small businesses. Notable ones that come to mind are ethylene oxide sterilizer rule, which we're planning on having a proposal out by the end of this year, sometime around the fall. There's also a number of rules that we have deadlines for in October that affect small businesses, largely dealing in the coatings arena and sources that are involved there. Last but not least, we're also looking at a recently finalized rule that a number of small businesses have been interested in, and that is a rule that sets the stage for how a major source can become an area source under this toxics program. If generally our regulations that affect area sources are less stringent than the regulations affecting major sources. And we have a regulation that sets the rules on how these transitions happen. We recently finalized it in 2020, and we're currently reviewing it. I'm sure for those of you that are interested in that regulation, we'll be interested in your input, and we'll probably be giving you a number of opportunities to give us that input over time. In closing, again, I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of time for Q's and A's. I want to make sure to really emphasize our commitment as an office to small businesses and working with small businesses, not only how to comply with our regulations, but more importantly, how to get input into these regulations while we're developing them. And anything we can do in that realm, we're more than happy and more than open to doing. Again, in the context of doing this, it's not just us, it's us working with our regional offices and more importantly, our state partners. So we want to make sure we're connected with all our regulatory partners in that arena. So with that, hopefully I gave you a pretty clear picture of what our commitment is to small businesses and big picture, some of the bigger regulations that we're focused on in the context of this year. And with that, I'll see if anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A yet. So please hover in your lower frame of your screen, and that's where you can find the Q&A. I will kick it off with a question, Peter. I work in Wichita, Kansas with a lot of aerospace companies, and we have a lot of painting and coating industry here. So I'm curious about the coating regulations that you alluded to.
Thank you, Nancy. There's a number of regulations that out of the 150 or so regulations that I mentioned that we do, I was surprised many years ago to find out that almost half of them are affect coatings operations in various industries, ranging from plywood to aerospace to auto manufacturing, and we have a regular, because there's so many of these rules and because they have legal, because the Clean Air Act requires that in 8-year cycles we review them, and we're never that up to date on these reviews. We get a number of court orders to mandatorily review them. And as such, we have a steady stream of various regulations in the coatings arena that we're working on in just about every given year. I'm gonna look at my notes real quick to see what's coming up more recently in that. So for example, we have the coating rules that we're looking at these days that are kind of more recently on the top of our list are paint stripping, the area source rule affecting paint stripping. We're also looking at the miscellaneous coatings manufacturing rule, and there's a plywood and composite wood products rule that has as part of it a coatings component. But like I said, this is just what's coming up this fall. We have a pretty steady diet of coatings rules on an annual basis. We try to be as consistent as we can between them all, but we recognize that some sectors are just uniquely different than some other sectors. Aerospace is a great example of an industry where they have all kinds of requirements that they have to meet because of FDA and other regulations. And we try to be mindful of all of the other regulations that some of these industries have to comply with as they comply with EPA regs.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. We do have two questions that have just come in. The first question is, any information about air regulations related to carbon sequestration?
I am not aware of any air regulations that, I know we're not working on any air regulations related to carbon sequestration at this point. I know that there's probably permitting actions that depending on what carbon sequestration facilities are out there, that they're going through various permitting actions. But these are not something that our office specifically is involved in. It's usually the states, maybe working with some of the regional offices. But I can tell you on a national front, there's nothing that we're working on right now.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, when can we expect a lithium-ion battery manufacturing MAC?
Oh goodness, not anytime soon. I think we have a MAC rule that affects batteries, more traditional batteries, but at this stage we are not reviewing that rule. I think we recently reviewed it a couple of years ago. So I don't know if lithium batteries would be a subcategory in that rule, or we would be looking at something new altogether if it ever came to that. But at this point, we don't have any immediate plans to be looking at that beyond the rule that we already have on the books around batteries.
Okay, thank you. And any other questions? I've also offered, if people raise their hand, we can have them ask the question.
We have something in the chat.
Okay, yes, I see that now. Are there any mandates to add a CEDRI or a CDX electronic reporting to rules affecting small businesses?
We, for about, it's probably around 6 or 7 years now, we've been as we've been updating various rules, we've had electronic reporting as part of that update of those rules. That electronic reporting is what CEDRI refers to. That's the system through which companies report to us. My understanding is everybody who's affected by that rule, when we update it and require electronic reporting, is required to report electronically after some spin-up period. So that would affect small businesses right along with large businesses. We try to do it rule by rule, and therefore we create very specific forms in each one of these rules that we update that folks have to electronically report through. And we have a team of folks that work on developing these forms and providing technical support to folks that have to submit these forms as part of compliance. And to my knowledge, all small businesses are covered under that, just like large businesses, and it happens rule by rule. So if we know the specific rule that you're interested in, we can tell you, oh yes, this is one that has electronic reporting already in place, or no, we will be adding electronic reporting to it at some future date because that's when the rule will be updated. So hopefully that helps. And again, I'm sorry to volunteer Rhonda, but I'm sure Rhonda could be an initial point of entry for any folks that have questions around electronic forms and compliance. We can definitely help you out. Nancy, you're muted.
Yes, if you have any questions further, definitely feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to move it along.
Thank you, Rhonda.
And we just have one comment in here from Tony. He said that the Perk Dry Cleaner and the auto body, 6H rule, and I know you alluded to that, Peter, those will be updated. It sounds like they're slated for November.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. And again, please work with us if you have any questions or any concerns, okay, especially around compliance.
I think we have time for one more question. I'll take this question. It's from Troy Johnson in Minnesota. And Troy asked, one of the challenges for small businesses, especially coders, one of the challenges that they face is obtaining environmental information on the products they use, so that with regard to VOC, HAP, and the solid content. Currently, there's no standard data sheet available, and having one would help small businesses track and report the environmental information. Is EPA doing any work in this area? Great question.
That is a great question. I'll take that back, Troy. I know we have one or two coatings rules that look at coatings with respect to their reactivity, as we call it, where some coatings that have more VOC content can be traded, if you would, for some coatings, for other coatings that have a lower VOC content, so you can use more of the lower VOC content fuel. And I know that California publishes contents of various fuels that are covered under that realm, under that reactivity realm, that we're also regulating some rules. But that's a set amount of rules covering certain specific coatings that tend to be more mass produced and mass used kind of coatings, consumer products kind of coatings. I'm not aware of something like that, which I think is what you're alluding to. I'm not aware of us producing something like that. I'll take that back, for the more industrial kinds of coatings. So I'll take that back to the team and ask them. That's a really good question.
It is. And I know periodically when we ask for it, we can get the environmental information sheet. It is not standardized like an SDS would be, but then it does have some of that information. But that would be, a very helpful tool from an environmental perspective to for manufacturers to produce at the same time they produce the SDS, that environmental information sheet. So
no, that's true, Nancy. It also provides some certainty, right, to the folks that are covered by these regulations, where we're all working off the same sheet. So I can definitely see the merits to that. I just honestly don't know. So yeah. I'll take that back. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Peter. And I'll pass it back to Jennifer to wrap up your session and introduce.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate your time and appreciate your support at EPA. Fantastic. Have a great day.
To Jennifer.
And next up, we have Paula Hoag, who is our US EPA, thank you, Asbestos and Small Business Ombudsman. And she is the person that we have been connecting with a lot through these programs. So I'd like to invite Paula to speak about what she's been working on and give us some updates from her office.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Will you be on camera as well? I'll
Yes.
encourage that. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for everyone that took the time to put together this training event. I'm really grateful to be here. My name is Paula Hoag, and I'm EPA's Asbestos and Small Business Ombudsman. Okay. So today, normally the Ombudsman is asked to give some updates. And so I want to just give some program overview for a refresher for many of you that are familiar with the program, but also for any newcomers. I'll talk more about our services and resources in the ASBO office. And then I'll also talk about priorities and accomplishments in my office, as well as more specifically in the ASBO program. And then I want to get a little bit more candid about some of the things I've learned over the last year as I've taken on the federal ombudsman role. And then I'll finally go into talking a little bit more about the monitoring and reporting strategy that I'm working on and support going forward. So this slide, I really try to hit home every time I introduce myself and my program, because ASBO is a pretty unique program. And I say ASBO, I mean, I am technically the ASBO, but I consider us a program. I have a team that works with me, and that's really important to note because I couldn't do this all on my own. I have 3 FTE. One of them is a detailee that's from the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. And then I have 3 C employees that they're senior environmental employees that support us as well. And really it's one program, but 2 distinct ombudsman roles. So there's the EPA Asbestos Ombudsman role and the EPA Small Business Ombudsman role. And really there's no correlation other than they're 2 ombudsman roles combined into one. So at some point EPA decided to combine those into one. I think it does make sense in some regards, even though they're very different. The ombudsman is really meant to be independent and impartial from the program offices. So the asbestos role that came out of the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, that is meant to be outside of the asbestos office that's situated in the Office of Chemical Safety. And the same thing with a small business ombudsman role that's mandated under the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, that we are outside of the air office. So that's intentional, because we can serve as an independent, impartial, and confidential resource. So both of those statutory requirements do have a oversight function requirement. Both of those ombudsman roles require periodic reporting and advisory opinion. And so with this slide, I really want to just highlight that we have, although there are 2 ombudsman roles and they're very different, there are 3 cross-cutting functions: to advocate, connect, and serve. So we advocate for the public on asbestos issues, and we also advocate for small businesses and a fair process in the EPA rulemaking process. So we connect. So I always try to remind people, we are not the technical experts. I mean, we try really hard to be keeping up with all that's going on at EPA, but there's a lot happening. And so what we try to do is really inform ourselves with who are the technical experts, either here at EPA, in the regions, or in the states. So we serve as an informational liaison to help connect the inquirer to technical resources and information. And finally, we provide the toll-free hotline that we have manned 5 days a week, 8:30 to 4:30 every day. And also we help fund the small business, National Small Business Environmental Assistance Program website, which I know Nancy is the grantee. Many of you are familiar with that, nationalsbeep.org website. So that's a big resource coming from a very small office. Funding and supporting the work that you all do in the 507 program is something we take very seriously and want to continue to serve. So the programs and services and resources, and this is something that I've been working with our team diligently over the last years to really get more clear on what we provide to our customers. So we have three main buckets: the direct assistance, resources and training, as well as advocacy support. So I consider the ASBO website, it's a new updated website. If you haven't had a chance to take a look, please do go and view our resources there, because that is where we're really trying to manage our resources and services through our web presence. We also, like I mentioned, have the toll-free hotline, and we also have a group email. So asbo@epa.gov is another way that you can reach us and reach the Ombudsman role. We have some of our resources and training materials that we recently updated. So on our website, you can access our new program guide. We have a trifold as well as a flyer that all kind of go together and help really communicate what our program does and how we can best serve the small business and asbestos public community. We manage a monthly bulletin called the Small Biz at EPA, and we really try to curate that information happening around the country here at EPA, regulations, updates or events, things that we think the small business community should know, small business regulatory community should know. We have a sustainability guide, and also I mentioned the nationalsb.org is a reference or a resource that we often go to and or recommend those that contact us to go to. So the advocacy and support bucket, I think that's one of those things, at least for the state programs, you may not see as much of the work that's happening internally here at EPA. The rulemaking review process that my role is included on is actually something that came about before the 507 program came up in the 90s. So the mid 80s, the Small Business Ombudsman role was put together, and it was intended to support some of the work that the Regulatory Flexibility Act and SBREFA, the updated version of RFA, the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement and Fairness Act, that is, those are the regulations that are requiring that agencies really consider small business impacts when they're in the rulemaking process. That is where the small business advocacy review panels come out. And that's a very formal process that the Office of Policy is actually the one that manages that with the Small Business Advocacy Chair. But my role, I really like to encourage an understanding that I can serve in a more informal process rather than a formal role like the SPAR panels. I can help support in a more informal capacity to support early engagement with small businesses and to talk with them when there are questions or concerns, which is one of the other things here on this advocacy support. I serve as an ombuds coaching support. And I say that because, I'll get calls from the small businesses themselves saying, I just got an enforcement letter. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure how to handle this. And I try to support them in an informal way to help them think through how to respond, how to prepare themselves, what to expect. And some of those things, those calls don't come in a lot, but we do get them. And especially over the last year, those things have come up. So that's another role that I play in this whole, support of small businesses. So I wanted to touch on the OUSDU strategic goals. And so for those that may not be familiar, OUSDU stands for the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. And that's the office where the Ombudsman, my role, is located. And we talked last year in September when we met. I went over some of the strategic goals and how that's really carried out. So I just thought I'd reference that here, that we are continuing to work under this strategic goal of, equipping our workforce internally in OUSDU, which is something I'll talk a little bit more about as far as the training and expertise that I've been focusing on and working to build over the last year when I took on this role as the Ombudsman, to operate as a valued partner in the work of EPA, to serve as an advocate and resource for small businesses, and to continuously improve operational efficiency and effectiveness. So more specifically, these are the ASBO priorities and accomplishments. So one of my big priorities based on the OUSDU strategic goals and plan is to improve communications and resources to support stakeholder needs. And I really wanted to do that through developing the charter, which I talked about last year. And that is an internal document, but those communication materials, the program guide, the trifold, those are the external communication materials that mirror what the charter has outlined. And that's really just as an important tool as I took on this ombudsman role to make sure I'm engaging internally here at EPA and making sure everyone is aware of what the scope of my role is, but also communicating that externally. And so those are those materials on our website. We're working on really tightening up our hotline and our inquiry process. So we're working on a standard operating procedure. And also, of course, as I mentioned, updating our web presence. So another priority being this supporting meaningful small business engagement activities. So some of that is really, just developing some of the, not just external, but internal engagement and communication that needs to happen because we are a small office. We have a limited FTE and budget. And in the grand scheme of things, EPA, there are a lot of resources available that can engage with small businesses or with the 507 program. And so we really want to help foster that partnership and understanding of who we are, who you all are, what the great work that you do in the States for the 507 program. And so I see my role as the ombudsman is to really help get that internal communication happening. And so we do have an engagement strategy and timeline that we've been working off of, as well as just, participating in ongoing training and listening sessions. I know we've had a couple regarding perk and dry cleaning. There's SBA has been having numerous roundtable meetings and we've been sitting in on those because there is a lot going on out of the Office of Chemical Safety in terms of their chemical assessment and potential management plans that they're under requirement to do. So those are very fast moving activities and we want to help support that as much as possible. Another couple priorities here, just strengthening internal EPA partnership and early two-way small business engagement opportunities. And so we have been working really closely with Rhonda over the last 6 months in helping equip the regional air small business liaison role. We've done several trainings and also a workshop here in early May to help make sure that, we want to support the regional staff as much as possible in this new role. And so we're really committed to working closely with them on going forward. As I mentioned, we also have an OECA DTLE, which has really helped make that bridge between the work we do here regarding compliance assistance and with the OECA office, who is also focused on compliance assurance and assistance. So we want to help, bridge that gap there. And is also, like I mentioned, some of the internal rule development process that happens at EPA, I want to make sure that we're providing resources and consultation to help the rule writers who have a huge process and plan in front of them. And we have a whole analytic blueprint here at EPA on how to write a rule. And it's a lot. And so we want to help as much as possible. We don't want to wait until the rule writer to get small business input when they know they have to have a SPART panel. That's very late in the game. We're hoping to help get them some early engagement with the small business community. And lastly, developing the ASBO program monitoring and reporting strategy, which is something I've talked with Jennifer and Donovan, the NSC chair and vice chair. I've been talking about working on that, and they shared that the NSC would like to be involved and have some input. So I'm really grateful and open to that. So I will be providing a straw man in July of this year. So in a few weeks, I'm hoping to have it by the end of June, actually. Okay, so this is where I want to get a little bit more open. I know I have only maybe a few more minutes, but I wanted to share some of the things that I've learned about the federal ombudsman role. I joined the Coalition of Federal Ombudsmen. I am actually a mentee under a mentorship program from a really amazing ombudsman that's been around for over 15 years. And I've gotten a lot of really great support to understand really the role of the federal ombudsman, because I've worked in this program since 2008, but just taking on the ombudsman role. And last year, I think I've come a long way and really trying to get to the crux of what we do, because my management has asked that I make sure I meet my statutory requirements. And taking a close look at that, has really helped me assess, where are we, where do we need to be? And so the intent of the ombudsperson or ombuds, and I know this is probably familiar for many of you, but it's really meant to be an official who's charged with serving as a representative or an advocate for a fair process. And typically a classical ombudsman will investigate complaints. And so it's a way to address issues coming from the public and ideally bring to light those problems through an advisory or opinion or a report. So the ombudsman profession has 3 standard pillars or standards of practice, and that is to serve as an independent, impartial, and confidential resource to help ensure operational excellence. And really, they recommend that we not call ourselves an ombudsman if we can't commit to those 3 pillars of being independent, impartial, and confidential. And so that is something I mentioned, that's my role being in the office of the administrator outside of the program offices is intentional because I need to be independent to be able to serve some of these requirements for the ombudsman.
Hey, Paula, we do have only 4 minutes left and we'd like we have some questions that are.
Okay. So I'll just really quickly, so the straw man is coming out in a few weeks, and that's an important tool that I think will help make sure everybody is aware of the monitoring and reporting requirements that I need to fulfill as the ombudsman. And I want to encourage everyone to contact me because, like I said, that is a big component of the ombudsman role, is to hear, listen to complaints, questions, concerns. And I can serve as an independent and confidential, impartial resource. Whether you want to make say if you're a state program and you want to talk with me, set up a time to speak with me, and I'll make sure that if you don't want me to share your name or information, that I do have ombudsman, some confidentiality clause to support that ombudsman confidential piece. So I just want to encourage people to reach out to me. I want to hear about what's going on in your states and your programs, or even here at EPA, because ultimately my goal is to meet my statutory requirement to fulfill providing monitoring and reporting advisory opinion. And that's it from me. I know there's questions, so I'm happy to take those.
All right, so our question and answer is open per usual, as well as you can raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted. One question, Paula, is through the hotline, what kinds of questions do you get outside of asbestos questions? And what kind of questions, if we get them in our state, should we be sending to you?
So we do get mostly asbestos questions that come in. We are trying to build some of our communication so that small businesses, or that piece, the small business community, understands they can use the hotline for that. We do, when we get some kind of question or concern that is more specific to small business, we do refer to the National SB contact list. We try to find the specific contact for their state and refer them that way. I think when it would be best to send them to us. So if you get questions that are not specific to your state or region, and it's a more national question and needs to be something out of EPA headquarters, that's where we can, we encourage you to send them our way, because we can connect you to, or connect the inquirer to the right resources and technical assistance. Or if they need to speak with me specifically, that's also the way to reach me.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And one question has just popped in. So we've got 1 minute. We'll ask that. Can state level ombudsmen be part of the Ombudsman's coalition and receive the same training and mentorship that you've gotten?
So it's the Coalition for Federal Ombudsmen. I don't know if they are going outside of that specific scope, because there are hundreds of federal ombudsmen, and you can look them up online. They're the Coalition of Federal Ombudsmen, and I would recommend, if you are really interested in that, to reach out to them and see what their availability is.
All right, well, that's it for the questions. And so with that, I will pass it back to Jennifer. Unless Jennifer, you would like me to introduce the next section here. So thank you so much, Paula.
I think
Thank
we're
you.
ready for a break, Nancy. And-
Okay. Well,